The lights inside the studio burned bright as the crowd settled into their seats, yet a quiet tension floated in the air as if something unexpected waited just beneath the surface. The cameras rolled slowly across the room, the audience murmured softly, and the stage crew moved with calm focus as the final preparations were made for the evening show. There was excitement mixed with curiosity, because everyone sensed that tonight would be special even though no one knew exactly why. They only felt a certain warm energy that followed Keanu Reeves whenever he walked into a room, and tonight that energy seemed stronger as if it carried a hidden story. Keanu entered the studio in his usual gentle way with a small smile that carried both kindness and mystery. He greeted the audience with a soft wave and sat down across from Steve Harvey. The crowd cheered with real affection because Keanu's presence always brought comfort. He had a calm spirit people trusted. He had a quiet strength people admired. And even before he spoke a single word, the room already felt different, as if everyone had stepped into a moment that would stay with them for a long time. But while Keanu sat on stage, answering the first warm questions with his natural humility, something happened behind the curtains that he did not know about. Just a few meters away in the shadows of the backstage area, Sandra Bullock stood in silence with one hand pressed gently to her chest. She had arrived quietly without making a sound. Even the staff did not notice her at first. She wore a soft smile mixed with nervousness because she did not expect to feel so many emotions all at once. She had come only to listen. She had not planned to speak or walk on stage. She only wanted to hear Keanu's words without him knowing she was there. And that was the moment when the story truly began, because Sandra's decision to stay hidden would change everything that followed. She leaned slightly toward the small backstage monitor that showed Keanu in perfect clarity. The bright studio lights made his face glow softly, and she found herself remembering moments she thought she had buried years ago, moments filled with laughter, moments filled with unspoken questions, moments filled with the calm connection that had existed between them from the very first day they met. She felt her heartbeat slow and then rise again as she watched him. She had not expected this many memories to return so strongly. The crew backstage recognized her after a few minutes and froze for a moment because they understood the weight of her presence. Yet she signaled them with a gentle smile not to alert Keanu. She wanted to stay unseen. She wanted to listen to him without changing his tone. She wanted his natural truth, and so they kept her secret, creating a quiet protective circle around her. Meanwhile on stage, Steve leaned forward with a familiar grin and said, "Man, every time you come here, people say the same thing. They say you bring peace with you. But tonight I want to talk about something a little deeper." Keanu looked curious and nodded gently. He did not expect the direction Steve was about to take. The audience leaned closer too, feeling the shift in tone. Steve asked, "When people talk about your past films, there is one partnership they always mention with so much warmth, and that is your work with Sandra Bullock. So I have to ask, what made that connection so special for you?" The room went silent, and Sandra backstage felt her breath catch in her throat. She had not known Steve would bring her up. She did not know if she was ready to hear the raw truth of Keanu's answer. But she also knew she could not walk away now. Her eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the curtain. Keanu closed his eyes softly for a moment, as if gathering thoughts he had kept safe for years. When he opened them, there was tenderness inside them, but also something deeper, something that carried both gratitude and unresolved emotion. He spoke slowly in that warm and steady voice that always felt honest. "Working with Sandra changed something in me. She had this way of making everything brighter without trying. She made long days feel shorter. She made heavy scenes feel lighter. She made people feel safe and seen. I always admired that about her." The audience sighed quietly with emotion. Steve raised his eyebrows with interest. But backstage, Sandra covered her mouth with one hand. His words touched a part of her spirit she had locked away. She felt her eyes grow warm. Keanu continued, and his voice held even more softness now. "I do not think I ever said this fully before, but she helped me during a time when I was still learning how to be open with people. I was still learning how to carry pain without letting it change the way I treated the people around me. Sandra made it easier to smile. She made it easier to trust my own kindness again." Sandra blinked hard as a tear slipped down her cheek. She was not expecting this level of truth. She had known Keanu admired her as a person, but she never knew he saw her presence as healing. She never knew he carried these quiet memories the same way she did. She whispered to herself, "Keanu, you never told me this." The backstage crew glanced at her with gentle care as she wiped her tears. They did not say anything. They only knew they were witnessing something rare and deeply human. Back on stage, Steve asked, "Did you two ever talk about how close you were? Did you ever tell her these things?" Keanu gave a small, sad smile. No, I think we were both too respectful, maybe too careful. Sometimes two people care about each other so much that they avoid saying things that could change the balance. Sometimes silence feels safer, but silence also leaves questions behind, questions that stay for years. The audience felt a heavy stillness after his words. Steve nodded with understanding. The cameras zoomed in slowly on Keanu's face, capturing the sincerity in his eyes. But backstage, Sandra's tears returned again. This time they fell more quickly down her cheeks because she could hear the truth behind his tone. He was not saying these words for show. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was speaking from a place he rarely opened, and she felt the weight of every unspoken moment between them. She stepped closer to the monitor, almost reaching out to touch the screen as if trying to reassure him across the distance. She whispered again, "I should have said something too. I should have told you what I felt back then." She felt a small ache in her chest, the ache of years passing too quietly. Keanu continued speaking on stage, unaware that Sandra stood only a few steps away with glistening eyes. "I think some people come into your life to remind you of who you are. They appear at the exact moment you need them. Sandra was one of those people for me." The crowd clapped with soft admiration. Steve leaned back with surprise at the depth of Keanu's honesty. But behind him, behind the curtain, Sandra slowly lowered her head and exhaled deeply. She had kept so many things quiet for so long, and listening to his words now felt like a door unlocking inside her heart. She realized how much she had missed him, not the actor, not the public figure, but the version of him who looked at her with gentle eyes on set, the version who made her laugh even during stressful days, the version who understood her without needing long explanations. And while the emotion grew inside her, the director backstage noticed something important. He saw the exact moment a new idea formed in Sandra's mind, an idea that could change the entire direction of the night. Because as Keanu spoke, Sandra slowly lifted her head and whispered to the director, "Should I go out there? Should I walk on stage?" The director stared at her in shock because he realized the magnitude of what she was considering. He could not decide for her, but he knew the world would stop the moment she stepped forward. Back on stage, Steve Harvey leaned toward Keanu again and asked the question that deepened everything even more. "If Sandra was here right now and she could hear you say all of this, what would you tell her directly?" Keanu smiled with quiet sadness. "I would tell her thank you for being kind, for being honest, for seeing me. I would tell her that I always carried our memories with me, even when we both moved forward in our lives. I would tell her that some connections never fade, they only grow quieter." The audience held their breath. Sandra wiped her cheeks again and her heart pounded with emotion. She whispered to herself, "Keanu, you have no idea I am listening to you right now." She stepped forward one slow step, then another, her lips trembling, her hands warming, her throat tightening with emotions she had kept hidden for so many years. She was seconds away from entering the stage. But before she could take the final step, something happened that changed the energy of the entire room. A staff member near the curtain accidentally shifted a piece of equipment. It struck a metal rail and made a loud, sudden noise backstage, a sharp echo that carried across the studio. The sound reached the audience, and it reached Keanu, and he turned his head slightly toward the source behind the curtains. He did not know who was there. He did not know what was happening, but he knew something felt strange. Sandra froze in place. The entire show froze. And in that powerful split second, everything shifted toward the moment that would define the rest of their story. The sudden metallic sound echoed through the studio in a way that felt almost unreal. It was sharp enough to interrupt the warm flow of conversation, yet soft enough to create confusion instead of alarm. Everyone paused at once. The cameras continued rolling in silent obedience while the audience looked around with puzzled faces. The crew backstage stood frozen, realizing that the small accident might have revealed something they had tried to keep hidden. And in the middle of all that quiet tension, Sandra Bullock stood completely still with her heartbeat pounding so loudly that she felt it in her throat. Keanu Reeves slowly turned his head toward the curtains, and the studio lights cast a soft glow that traced the confusion on his face. He did not understand the noise, but something about it felt unusual. It felt purposeful even though it was accidental. He watched the curtain gently sway from the movement backstage. His eyes narrowed with curiosity, and then a gentle look of concern spread across his features, as if he sensed something important was happening behind those layers of thick black fabric. Steve Harvey immediately leaned forward as he noticed the shift in Keanu's attention. He glanced over his shoulder but saw nothing except the curtained entrance. Steve tapped the card in his hand thoughtfully, lowering his voice as he asked, "You good man, something caught your attention back there." Keanu nodded slowly while keeping his gaze fixed on the curtain for another moment. "I thought I heard something," he said softly. "Maybe one of the lights or some equipment moved." The explanation made sense on the surface, but Sandra felt the weight of every second he spent looking in her direction. She stepped back instinctively, her breath uneven, because she knew she had come dangerously close to being seen before she was emotionally ready. She wanted to walk out at the right moment, not stumble into the spotlight by accident. She needed the moment to be honest, intentional, meaningful, not rushed, not messy. But behind her eyes, a new fear grew quietly. She wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. She wondered if hearing him speak with such tenderness had opened a part of her heart she was not prepared to confront in front of millions of viewers. She wondered if stepping out now would change their lives in ways she did not fully understand. The backstage director noticed the panic in her expression and whispered, "You do not have to go out if you are not ready. You can stay right here. No one will force you." Sandra nodded softly, but her eyes drifted back to the monitor anyway because she could not stay away from Keanu's voice. She could not ignore the feeling that destiny had placed her here for a reason. She whispered almost silently, "I just need a moment, just one more moment to breathe." Meanwhile, on stage, Steve cleared his throat and guided the conversation forward with his natural humor, trying to ease the tension that had settled in the room. "Well," he said with a smile, "unless someone is sneaking snacks behind that curtain, I think we are safe. Now let's get back to what you were saying because you had the whole audience floating in their feelings." The crowd laughed softly and Keanu returned his attention to Steve with that gentle half-smile he carried so naturally. But the warmth in his eyes did not fully hide the small trace of curiosity still lingering in him. Something inside him felt strange, something felt familiar, he did not know why. Steve continued, "You said you would thank Sandra if she were here. You said some connections never fade. Let's go deeper. What do you think made her impact stay with you for so many years?" Keanu took a slow breath. This time his voice came out more thoughtful, more reflective, as if he were opening a memory he rarely touched. "I think the reason her impact stayed is because she never tried to change me. She never forced anything. She let me be myself. She let me make mistakes without judgment. She had this incredible way of listening without making me feel exposed. She made the world feel softer." Sandra covered her mouth again as fresh tears formed. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to control her emotions. But his words reached the deepest part of her heart because they reflected things she remembered, two things she had kept safe inside her for years. She whispered, "Keanu, I never knew you felt this deeply." Keanu continued, unaware that he was affecting Sandra so profoundly. "I think everyone meets one person in their life who feels like a calm place, a safe place, and whether they stay forever or not, that presence stays in your memory. It becomes part of who you are. Sandra was that for me." The audience let out a collective breath that sounded almost like a sigh. A few people wiped tears from their eyes. Even Steve looked moved as he placed his hand over his chest with a slow nod. But backstage, something inside Sandra shifted. For the first time since arriving, she felt something warm spread through her chest, something brave, something ready. This was no longer just a moment of nostalgia. This was a moment of truth, a moment that deserved honesty, a moment that could heal old silence. She whispered to herself softly, "I cannot let him speak all this from his heart while I stand here hidden. He deserves to know I hear him. He deserves the truth too." She began moving closer to the curtain again. Her steps were slow but steady. Her hands trembled, but her courage grew with every second. And this time she did not stop. The backstage crew looked at her with wide eyes, understanding what she was choosing to do. They stepped aside respectfully, giving her space. They could feel the history between her and Keanu pulling itself toward the open air. On stage, Steve asked another question, unaware of the emotional storm forming just behind him. "If you had one memory with Sandra that you think shaped your friendship the most, what would it be?" Keanu leaned back, looking down at his hands as he thought. "There was a day on set when she noticed I was tired. I was going through a rough moment during that time. I did not tell anyone, but she saw it. She brought me a cup of tea without saying anything. No questions, no pressure, just kindness. It seems small, but it meant everything to me." Sandra pressed a hand against her chest again. She remembered that moment vividly. She remembered the quiet way he looked at her. She remembered how she hoped he understood her gesture spoke for her heart. Keanu continued, "That moment stayed with me because sometimes the smallest acts reveal the deepest truths." Sandra took one final breath, and she stepped toward the curtain. But at the exact same moment, Steve suddenly looked at his producer, who was giving him a signal from behind the camera. The producer held up a card with bold writing and pointed urgently toward the backstage entrance. Steve's eyes widened with surprise. He turned to Keanu with a slow smile. The audience leaned forward. Sandra froze inches from stepping out. And Steve said, "Keanu, my brother, it turns out you might want to prepare yourself, because something is about to happen that even you did not see coming." Keanu blinked, confused by the sudden shift in tone. "What do you mean?" Steve leaned back in his chair and smiled even wider. "Someone very important just walked into the studio." The audience gasped. Keanu looked around with real curiosity and perhaps a hint of nervousness. And Sandra, hidden behind the curtain, felt her entire body tremble as she realized that the moment she had been avoiding for years was finally arriving. Steve pointed toward the backstage entrance. The music team began playing a soft, emotional tune. The light shifted slowly toward the curtain, and the studio waited in breathless silence. As Sandra Bullock took her first step toward the stage, the studio fell into a thick and breathless silence as the light slowly shifted toward the backstage entrance. Every face in the audience turned with anticipation. Even the cameras seemed to pause in their movements as if they understood the weight of what was about to happen. This was no ordinary moment on a talk show. This was a moment that carried years of unspoken feelings, unresolved memories, and the quiet tenderness of two people who had once shared a connection deeper than words. And now, without planning it, without rehearsing it, without preparing her heart, Sandra Bullock stood only a few steps from revealing herself to Keanu Reeves. She smoothed the front of her dress with trembling hands. She felt her heartbeat tapping against her ribs like a quiet drum calling her forward. Every part of her felt raw and awake. She whispered to herself, "You can do this, breathe, just breathe." Yet even with all her courage, her legs felt heavy because she knew the second she walked through that curtain, she could no longer hide from her past or from the feelings she once buried. Keanu sat on stage with confusion slowly spreading across his face. He looked toward the curtain again as Steve Harvey gave him a warm but mysterious smile. Keanu tilted his head slightly as if trying to read something in the silence. "Who is here?" he asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. There was a strange stirring in his chest, something familiar, something that felt like he was being pulled toward a memory he could not fully name. Steve chuckled gently. "Man, I cannot tell you yet, but just know this. The whole world is about to see something real, something honest, something that feels good for the soul." The audience murmured with excitement. A few leaned forward, clutching the edge of their seats. Backstage, Sandra took her first step. The curtain brushed lightly against her arm as she moved, and for a moment she felt the weight of every emotion that had followed her for years. She thought of the times she had wished she could speak openly with Keanu, the times she wondered if he felt the same warmth she felt, the nights she caught old interviews and remembered moments on set where their laughter seemed to echo deeper than friendship. She thought of all the years that passed without answers. And she thought of how unexpected it felt to be here right now, walking toward him again. The music grew softer, more emotional. The lights dimmed on the edges of the stage, focusing a warm glow on the curtain. Sandra stepped again. Just before she reached the opening, she paused. She knew once she crossed that line, her life and Keanu's life would shift. The world would talk, questions would rise, stories would spread, but none of that mattered compared to what she needed to say to him. She whispered to herself, "I am doing this for him. I am doing this for the truth." On stage, Keanu stared at the curtain with a strange intensity. His eyebrows lowered in thought. Something about the atmosphere made his heart beat faster. He had a feeling. He did not know why, but he felt something in him prepare itself for a moment bigger than he expected. Steve touched his arm lightly. "Just breathe, man. You are gonna want your heart steady for this." Keanu let out a soft, nervous laugh. "Okay, now you are making me nervous." The audience laughed gently, but the tension stayed in the air. Sandra closed her eyes and stepped through the curtain. The audience gasped. The music softened. Keanu turned fully toward her. And for a moment, time stopped. Sandra stood at the edge of the stage with her hands held in front of her, her eyes wide with emotion, her smile trembling as she looked directly at him. The lights wrapped around her in a warm glow, making her look almost dreamlike. But what hit Keanu hardest was not the lights or the entrance. It was the expression on her face, the mixture of vulnerability, affection, and disbelief. Keanu's eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly. For a moment, he did not breathe. He whispered her name under his breath, barely audible. "Sandra." She nodded softly. "Hi, Keanu." Her voice was gentle, a little shaky, filled with a tenderness she could not hide. The audience erupted into applause so loud it shook the stage. People stood from their seats, some smiled through tears, others clapped with excitement. But Keanu heard none of it. All he saw was her. All he felt was the weight of the years and the sudden collapse of the distance between them. Steve stood up from his chair, spreading his arms proudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sandra Bullock has entered the building." The applause grew even stronger. But while the noise roared around them, Keanu remained frozen. He did not move. He did not blink. He felt something inside him open like a long, locked door swinging wide. He whispered, "You are really here." Sandra nodded again. "I heard everything you said." Keanu swallowed hard, the emotion rising in his chest too quickly to control. "You heard all of it." "Every word." The audience quieted slightly as they sensed the shift in tone. They could feel that something intimate was unfolding, something deeper than a surprise appearance. Keanu took a slow breath. "I did not know you were backstage." Sandra stepped closer. Her movements were slow and gentle. "I know, I wanted to listen without you seeing me." Keanu looked down for a moment as if grounding himself. "I hope I did not say anything wrong." She shook her head softly. "No, Keanu, you said everything right." The crowd murmured again, whispering to each other about how honest their exchange felt. Steve watched them with quiet respect, stepping aside to give them space. He understood when a moment needed room to breathe. Sandra stood just a few feet from Keanu now. She could see the emotion in his eyes. She could see the memories behind them, and she felt her own eyes soften as she said, "I did not know you carried all those feelings. You never told me." Keanu let out a shaky breath. "I did not think it mattered. I thought we both moved on." Sandra smiled softly. "We moved forward, but we never moved away." Keanu looked up quickly, surprised by her words. His heart thumped harder. Steve raised his eyebrows with a quiet smile and whispered to the audience, "This is the real stuff right here." Keanu whispered, "Sandra, I meant everything I said, every part." She nodded. "I know, I could hear it in your voice." The room felt like it was shrinking around them, narrowing until only the two of them existed. But just as Sandra was about to speak again, Steve suddenly received a signal from his producer, a sharp gesture from behind the cameras. It meant they needed to cut to a commercial break soon. Steve's eyes widened because he knew interrupting this moment would break the emotional flow, and the audience would never forgive him for it. So instead of cutting, he lifted his hand toward the crew and mouthed, "Not yet." The producer hesitated but then gave a reluctant nod. They all knew something extraordinary was happening. Sandra took another small step toward Keanu, her voice trembling with honesty. "Keanu, I came here to listen, but I realized something. I cannot stay silent anymore, not tonight." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers, his heart wide open. And just as she prepared to speak the truth she had held for years, something unexpected happened. A single bright tear rolled down Keanu's cheek. The audience gasped. Sandra froze. And the entire studio held its breath as Keanu tried to speak, but his voice cracked. That single tear carried years of silence. Years of unanswered feelings. Years of what if. And now it was falling. The studio became so silent that even the quiet hum of the lights felt louder than the audience itself. That single tear sliding down Keanu's cheek changed the atmosphere instantly. It was not dramatic. It was not forced. It was soft and real, the kind of tear that comes when years of silence meet sudden truth. It caught the light as it fell, and Sandra froze when she saw it. Her breath slipped from her chest as she realized she had never seen him break like this. Not in public, not in private. Not even on the hardest days they shared on set. This was something deeper, something honest, something he could not hide anymore. Keanu wiped his face slowly, almost embarrassed, but the emotion was too strong to control. He gave a small, shaky laugh and whispered, "I am sorry. I did not mean to let that out." Sandra stepped closer, her expression softening with a tenderness she could not disguise. "Keanu, do not apologize. Please do not. You have the right to feel everything you feel. You always did." Her voice was gentle, almost like a soft hand resting on his heart, and Keanu felt it. He felt every word touch the place inside him that had been locked for years. He looked at her again, his eyes glistening with raw emotion. "I did not know you would hear everything I said tonight. Maybe I should have told you long ago. Maybe I should have been braver. Maybe." He stopped, unable to finish. Sandra's eyes filled too, her heartbeat rising with every word he spoke. Keanu, we both stayed silent, not because we did not care, but because we cared too much and did not want to ruin what we had. We were scared of changing something that already felt precious. Keanu slowly nodded. He understood. He had always understood. But hearing her admit, it felt like a weight lifting from his chest. Harvey gently stepped aside, giving them space while the crowd remained frozen in anticipation. This was no longer a talk show segment. This was a private conversation unfolding in front of millions, yet it felt more intimate than any closed-door moment. Keanu whispered, "I always wondered what would have happened if we talked honestly back then." Sandra's voice trembled. "I wondered too, many nights, but life kept moving, we both kept working, and somehow the moment never came." Keanu lowered his gaze. "Do you regret it?" The question hit the studio like a soft shockwave. People leaned even closer. Some held their breath. Sandra swallowed hard. "I regret staying silent. I regret not telling you what I felt, but I do not regret us. I do not regret the connection we had. I do not regret the kindness we shared." Keanu looked up again, searching her eyes for the truth behind her words. "And what did you feel, Sandra?" Her lips trembled, but she refused to look away. "I felt safe with you, seen with you, understood with you. I felt things that scared me because they were real, and I did not want to misread them. I did not want to complicate your life. I did not want to lose our friendship." Keanu blinked slowly. Each word she spoke felt like a quiet echo of his own heart. Sandra continued, her voice barely steady. "But hearing everything you said tonight made me realize something important. We were both trying so hard to protect something that we forgot to live inside it." Keanu leaned forward slightly as if drawn toward her. "Did you come here planning to say all this?" She shook her head gently. "No, I only came to watch. I thought I could keep my feelings quiet. I thought it would be enough just to hear you talk." She paused, breathing through the emotion. "But when you started speaking from your heart, I felt mine open too." The audience murmured softly, deeply moved. Many wiped their eyes. Even the camera crew looked overwhelmed as they captured the moment with trembling hands. Steve finally spoke in a gentle whisper. "I think the world needed to hear this today. Real connection is rare, real honesty is rare, and you too, you have something people do not see often." Keanu nodded quietly. "We always did." Sandra stepped even closer now until she stood directly in front of him. She reached out slowly, giving him enough time to pull away if he wanted to, but Keanu did not move. He let her place her hand over his. The moment her fingers touched his skin, he exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. The audience gasped softly. Sandra whispered, "Keanu, I am here now, and I do not want to hide anymore." Keanu looked at their hands together and then up into her eyes again. Something broke open inside him, something gentle, something warm, something he had held locked away long ago because he thought time had taken it from him. He whispered, "I did not know if you ever felt what I felt." Sandra smiled, tears falling freely. "I did, I always did, I just did not know how to say it." Keanu let out another shaky breath. "And now?" She held onto his hand a little tighter. "Now I am saying it, and I want you to say what you feel too." Keanu's eyes softened. "I feel grateful you are here. I feel relieved you heard my truth, and I feel scared because this moment means more to me than I can explain." Sandra's breath caught. "Scared why?" Keanu hesitated, glancing down again. "Because this feels like a door opening, one we closed for years, and I do not know where it leads." The audience murmured with intensity. Steve pressed one hand to his chest because even he felt the depth of that confession. Sandra whispered, "Keanu, doors open for a reason. Maybe this one waited for the right moment. Maybe that moment is now." He looked at her again, searching for reassurance in her eyes. She stepped even closer until their faces were inches apart. "Keanu," she said softly, her voice trembling with truth, "I never stopped caring about you." Silence. The audience froze. Keanu froze. Even the air felt still. His lips parted, his breath caught, his eyes softened. But before he could answer her, before he could say the words rising inside him, a loud alert sounded from the stage manager at the corner of the studio. They were out of broadcast time. They had to cut. The screen lights flashed red. Steve looked panicked. The audience shouted no. Keanu turned sharply. Sandra's eyes widened. And the stage manager yelled across the set, "We need to cut to break now." The studio fell into chaos. And the truth that was seconds from being spoken hung in the air unfinished. The break that no one wanted. The stage manager's voice crashed into the moment like a sudden storm, cutting through the warm emotional air and shattering the silence that had held Keanu and Sandra so tightly together. The flashing red lights above the cameras signaled an urgent warning that every person in live television feared. The show had reached its time limit, and they needed to cut immediately to avoid a broadcast error. It was a rule the crew could not break, but almost everyone in the room wished they could ignore it just this once. The audience reacted first. A loud wave of voices filled the studio. People gasped, groaned, and begged for Steve to stall, to stretch the moment, to do anything that would keep the cameras rolling. They did not want this fragile emotional truth to be interrupted. They did not want the raw connection between Keanu and Sandra to freeze midair. They could feel something huge unfolding, and the idea of cutting to commercials felt almost disrespectful to the depth they had just witnessed. But the red lights kept flashing. The stage manager shouted again, louder, "Steve, we have to go to break now. We cannot delay this one." Sandra felt her heart jump painfully inside her chest. She looked at Keanu with a mix of urgency and fear. She had finally opened her heart after years of silence. She had taken the step she never thought she would take. She had said words she believed she would never say out loud. And now, at the exact moment she needed to hear his answer, the moment was about to be ripped away from her. Keanu felt the same panic rise inside him. The truth he had been holding back for years was finally at the edge of his voice, finally ready to be spoken, and now he was told to wait. The feelings he had suppressed, softened, buried under time and distance had risen again like a tide he could not stop, and now he feared they might be pushed down again. He whispered urgently, "Wait, Sandra, listen, I need to say this before." But before he could finish his sentence, two crew members stepped onto the stage to guide them off so they could reset the space for the break. The cameras needed to be shut off, the lights needed to shift, everything needed to pause. Keanu took a quick step forward, refusing to let the moment slip away. "Just one more minute," he pleaded. "Please, I need one more minute." But the stage manager shook his head firmly. "We cannot, we will lose the feed, we will crash the show." Steve moved toward Keanu, placing a careful hand on his shoulder. "Brother, I am sorry, we have no choice, we will finish this as soon as we get back, I promise." Keanu clenched his jaw, frustration deepening in his eyes. This was the first time he had ever looked upset on a show. He was gentle by nature, calm even in chaos, but right now he felt helpless in a way he hated. Sandra reached for his hand quickly. "Keanu," she whispered, "I am not leaving, I am right here. When we come back, you can say whatever you need to say." The warmth of her touch grounded him for a moment. He looked at her hand wrapped around his and felt the steady reassurance he had always felt with her, even in the most unexpected moments. She gave him a soft nod, trying to ease the fear she saw in his eyes. But there was something else behind her expression, something deeper, something she had not revealed yet. The lights dimmed slightly as the show prepared to cut. The producers motioned for Steve to lead the moment. Steve raised his voice, addressing the audience. "All right, folks, we are stepping into a short break. Do not move, do not even blink. We will be back in just a few minutes." The crowd groaned again but clapped anyway, trying to show support. The cameras switched off. The on-air sign went dark. Immediately, the studio fell into a strange half-silence, the kind that comes right after a storm. Sandra and Keanu stood only a few inches apart, but now the moment was fragile again. The emotional window they had been standing inside had closed for now, and neither knew how to hold on to the feeling without the pressure of the live broadcast keeping their hearts open. Keanu let out a long breath and whispered almost timidly, "Are you okay?" Sandra nodded slowly. "Yes, I am okay, I am just overwhelmed." Keanu smiled sadly. "Me too." But Sandra saw something else in his eyes, something heavy, something old, something that made her chest tighten. She had seen that look before in private moments on set when he was deep in his thoughts. She whispered, "Keanu, what were you going to say before the break?" Keanu opened his mouth to speak, but the crew moved in around them again, adjusting microphones, checking lights, preparing the stage for the next segment. They had only minutes before they were live again, and the space around Keanu and Sandra filled with movement and technical noise. Steve walked over to them and lowered his voice. "Hey, you two, listen. I know you got a lot to say, I can feel it, but when we go back live, just speak from your hearts. People connect to honesty. Do not hold back just because the cameras are on." Keanu nodded, but that fear still lingered in his expression. Sandra touched his arm softly. Look at me. He turned. Her eyes were warm and steady. Whatever you say, I will listen. Whatever you feel, I will not walk away. I waited years to hear your truth. I am not losing it now. Those words eased a piece of him he did not know was trembling. But before he could answer, the stage manager began counting down loudly. Back in 10 seconds. Keanu's heart started pounding again. 9. Sandra stepped closer to him. 8. The audience settled back in their seats. People leaned forward again, eager to see the moment continue. 7. Keanu took a slow breath. 6. Sandra squeezed his hand one more time, grounding him. 5. Keanu finally whispered the truth existing in his chest. Sandra, there is something I never told you. Her eyes widened. 4. What is it, Keanu? 3. I do not want to lose you again. 2. Sandra's breath caught. 1. The light snapped back on. The camera switched to live. The audience cheered. Steve smiled wide. And Keanu and Sandra stood frozen in the most vulnerable moment of their lives. The lights snapped back to life the moment the countdown hit 0, flooding the stage with a warm glow that made everything look sharper, brighter, and impossibly more intense. The audience erupted into loud applause as the cameras started rolling again, but the noise did nothing to soften the emotional electricity in the air. Keanu and Sandra stood face to face, still holding onto the last words he had spoken moments before the break, words that had slipped out from a place he had kept locked for years. Words that neither of them expected to be revealed tonight. I do not want to lose you again. They both heard it, they both felt it, and now, with millions watching and the lights burning above them, there was nowhere for that truth to hide. Keanu swallowed hard and lowered his head slightly, trying to calm his racing heartbeat. Sandra looked at him with wide eyes full of emotion she could no longer contain. The audience sensed something important was unfolding and grew utterly silent, waiting for the very next breath between them. Steve Harvey stepped forward slowly, speaking with a soft respect that the moment deserved. Keanu, he said, I believe there is something you need to say, and I think she is ready to hear it. Keanu lifted his head, his eyes glistened under the lights, reflecting both fear and courage. He nodded once, turning fully towards Sandra. This time he did not hold back. This time he let his heart guide every word. He spoke slowly, his voice trembling with truth. Sandra, I tried for so many years to convince myself that what we had was just friendship. I told myself to let it go, to move on, to let time wash it away. But no matter what I did, the feeling stayed. Sandra's breath hitched. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. Keanu continued, I think I stayed quiet because I was afraid of ruining something that mattered to me, afraid of putting weight on your shoulders, afraid of losing the connection we had, and so I stayed silent. He paused, exhaling shakily. But silence only lasts until the truth becomes too heavy to carry. The audience murmured softly, deeply moved. Even the camera operators felt tears forming as they framed the moment. Sandra stepped closer, her voice trembling. Keanu, what truth? Keanu's chest rose with a long breath. He looked into her eyes with a raw honesty he had never allowed himself before. The truth is, I cared about you more than I allowed myself to admit, more than I dared to show, more than friendship, more than partnership. I cared in a way that scared me. Sandra covered her mouth as more tears fell. The audience gasped, leaning forward as if trying to catch every syllable. Keanu kept speaking, every word born from years of hidden feeling. I thought time would dim it, but it didn't. It stayed, quiet but alive, and when you walked out here tonight, I realized something. I never stopped caring. The room fell utterly silent. No one moved, no one blinked. Sandra lowered her hand and took a slow, trembling breath. Keanu, she whispered, I cared too. I cared more than I dared to admit. I felt everything you felt, but I was scared too, scared it would change us, scared we were reading the moment wrong. Keanu stepped closer. Were we wrong? Sandra shook her head slowly, her voice soft but clear. No, we were right, we just didn't let ourselves say it. She reached for his hand again, and when their fingers touched, the audience erupted into emotional applause. Steve Harvey pressed a hand to his chest, smiling at the beauty of the moment unfolding before him. Sandra spoke again with a tenderness that filled the room. Keanu, when I walked through that curtain tonight, I felt something unlock inside me. I realized how long I have been holding this inside. I realized how many years passed without me telling you the truth. Keanu squeezed her hand, whispering, "Then tell me now." She lifted her gaze to his, her voice soft but steady. "I never stopped caring about you either. I never stopped wondering. I never stopped holding those memories close. And hearing you speak today, it reminded me why." The audience let out a soft collective sigh, overwhelmed by the sincerity of their exchange. Keanu smiled gently through his tears. "So where does that leave us now?" Sandra paused, breathing in the moment, letting the weight of the question settle. She looked at him with eyes full of emotion. "It leaves us here, in the present, with the truth finally spoken, and the chance to understand what it means." Keanu nodded slowly. "And do you want to understand it?" She whispered, "Yes, I want to understand us, whatever we are now, whatever we could be." Keanu's expression softened into something warm and full. For the first time that night, hope flickered inside him. Real, tender hope, the kind he had not felt in years. Steve stepped closer, smiling. "You see, folks, sometimes the universe waits for the right moment to bring people back to each other, and sometimes that moment happens on live television." The audience laughed softly, wiping their eyes. But the tender moment was not finished yet. Keanu turned to Sandra again, his voice gentle. "I am not asking for anything rushed. I am not asking for anything dramatic. I just want us to talk, really talk, to see where our hearts take us." Sandra nodded, her smile trembling with emotion. "I want that too. I want time with you, real time, no cameras, no schedules, just honesty." Keanu exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being here, for listening, for saying what you said." She stepped a little closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for saying what you carried for so long." Their foreheads almost touched as they stood in the warm studio lights, their hands still gently intertwined. It was not a romantic moment forced by the spotlight. It was something deeper, something grounded in truth, years of connection, and a quiet affection that survived time. Steve looked at them, then at the crowd, and said softly, "This right here is something beautiful, something rare, and something none of us will forget." The audience stood and applauded. A standing ovation surged through the studio like a wave of gratitude and love for the moment they had witnessed. Sandra looked at Keanu with a soft smile. "So what now?" Keanu smiled back. "Now we start where we should have started, with honesty, with time, with patience, with understanding." She nodded. "With us." For the first time in many years, they both felt a quiet peace settle over them. A peace that came from finally speaking their truth. A peace that came from finally letting their hearts breathe. The show slowly eased into its closing moments, but Keanu and Sandra remained close, their hands still gently intertwined even as the cameras pulled back. They did not let go, not yet, not after everything that had been shared. And as the lights dimmed, as the audience continued to applaud, as the moment became something larger than the show itself, they both understood something important. Sometimes the heart waits years for the right moment. Sometimes silence protects feelings until the world is ready for them. And sometimes two people who care deeply but quietly find their way back to understanding each other. Tonight was that moment. Tonight was the beginning of a new chapter.